From the moment their eyes met, it felt like the universe had been waiting for this moment. A pull beyond reason, a familiarity that neither could explain, yet both felt deep within their souls. It wasn't their first meeting, nor would it be their last. Some loves are written in the stars, destined to find their way back no matter how many lifetimes pass. But would fate be kind to them this time, or would destiny test their love once more? The cafe buzzed with the low hum of conversation, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the crisp evening air. She hadn't meant to come here, hadn't planned to linger in the city at all, but something had drawn her in, a feeling she couldn't shake. Layla adjusted the scarf draped over her shoulders, her fingers brushing against the delicate chain she always wore, the small pendant warm against her skin. It was one of those nights where the world felt heavier, yet strangely light, as if something just beyond reach was waiting for her. And then it happened. A subtle shift in the air, an unspoken pull, and suddenly, she felt it, a presence, familiar yet unknown. She turned her head instinctively, her breath catching as her gaze landed on him. He was sitting by the window, the golden glow of the city lights framing his features. Dark hair, deep-set eyes, and a face that carried a story she felt she should remember. There was nothing extraordinary about him, yet she couldn't look away. Something in her chest tightened, her heartbeat quickening, and she swore she saw the same flicker of recognition in his eyes. It lasted no more than a moment, but in that moment, time slowed. Kian had felt this before. That unshakable pull, that strange certainty that told him he knew someone without ever meeting them. It had happened before in dreams, in fleeting glimpses of places he had never been, in emotions too strong to belong to the present. And now, sitting in a cafe he hadn't planned to visit, he was staring into the eyes of a woman who felt like a memory waiting to be remembered. He didn't move at first, afraid that if he did, the moment would shatter and she would disappear. But she didn't. She was still looking at him, her eyes wide, searching, as if waiting for him to say something.
So he did.
Have we met before? The words felt foolish, yet they slipped out naturally. Layla hesitated, something in her telling her to say yes, even when logic argued otherwise. She shook her head. I don't think so. But the way her voice wavered betrayed her own uncertainty. Kian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. It's strange, isn't it? He gestured between them. This feeling. She should have brushed it off, should have laughed and let it go. But she didn't. Because the truth was she felt it too. The unexplainable warmth, the quiet knowing that this wasn't their first encounter. Only their first in this lifetime. Yeah, she admitted softly. It is. A silence settled between them, not awkward but thick with something neither of them could name. The cafe door opened, and a gust of wind carried the scent of rain inside. Layla shivered slightly, gripping her cup a little tighter. Kian noticed. Would you like to sit? He asked, motioning toward the chair across from him. She hesitated, but only for a second. Then, as if the decision had already been made for her, she moved. Sitting across from him felt natural, like something she had done 100 times before. And maybe she had. Maybe, somewhere beyond time, beyond lifetimes, they had sat just like this, speaking of things that only their souls remembered. Kian studied her for a moment before speaking again. I know this sounds ridiculous, but I feel like I've been waiting for this moment. Layla let out a soft breath, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. It doesn't sound ridiculous. Because it didn't. Not to her. Something unspoken passed between them, a connection woven through time, through whispered promises and lost moments. She didn't know where this would lead, didn't know why fate had decided now was the time to bring them together. But she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't the beginning. The warmth of the cafe wrapped around them, shielding them from the cold world outside. The lights flickered gently, casting soft shadows on the table between them. The air between them was thick with something neither could name, a silent pull stronger than words, stronger than reason. Layla shifted in her seat, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup, as if grounding herself. Do you believe in fate? She asked suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Kian studied her for a moment, his fingers tapping absent-mindedly against the table. I never used to, he admitted. I always thought life was just a series of choices. But his gaze locked onto hers, something unspoken flickering behind his eyes. Then I met you. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. She couldn't. It made no sense, and yet it was the only thing that had ever made sense. She had spent years feeling like something was missing, like she was waiting for something or someone she couldn't name. And now, sitting across from this stranger, who wasn't really a stranger, she felt whole in a way she never had before. I feel like I've known you forever, she confessed, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Kian let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. I know exactly what you mean. Silence settled over them. But it wasn't empty. It was full. Full of memories they hadn't yet recalled, of moments they hadn't yet lived but somehow already had. Layla hesitated before speaking again. Sometimes I dream of places I've never been. I hear voices I don't recognize, but they feel familiar. She looked down, almost afraid to meet his gaze. And there's always someone there. I never see his face, but I know him. I know his voice, his presence. It's comforting. Kian's fingers curled slightly against the table. Tell me, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. She swallowed. It always starts the same. I'm standing by the ocean, but the sky is different. Deeper, endless. There's music, laughter, but it's distant, like an echo from another time. Her eyes softened as she spoke. And then I feel him. Behind me. Watching. Waiting. Kian didn't blink. And then, Layla exhaled. I turn around, but before I can see his face, I wake up. Something in Kian's chest tightened. I have the same dream, he admitted. She froze. The ocean, the sky, the music, it's all there, he continued. But I'm the one waiting. And before I can reach her, before she can see me, his voice trailed off, his jaw tightening. She's gone. The cafe around them seemed to fade, the hum of voices dulling, the clatter of cups and spoons disappearing. It was just them, caught in the space between the past and the present, between memory and reality. Layla's heart pounded. What does it mean? Kian inhaled sharply. I think we've done this before. She shivered, but not from the cold. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small silver pendant, placing it on the table between them. It was simple, unremarkable, except for the small engraving on the back. A symbol. A constellation. Layla's breath hitched. She reached for the chain around her neck, pulling out a nearly identical pendant. Her hands trembled as she turned it over. The same constellation. The same stars. Kian let out a slow breath. I don't think this is our first life. Layla swallowed hard, staring at the pendants, at the impossible proof lying between them. Then why do we keep finding each other? Kian looked at her, his voice steady. Because we're not meant to be apart. Tears burned at the edges of her eyes. She had spent years searching for something she couldn't name, aching for something she didn't understand. And now, finally, she knew. Some loves weren't meant to be found. Some loves were meant to return, no matter how many lifetimes it took. The weight of their realization settled between them, thick and undeniable. The cafe, once filled with the soft hum of quiet conversations and the clinking of porcelain cups, now felt like a vacuum where time had stopped. Layla's fingers remained curled around the pendant, her heartbeat echoing in her ears. She wasn't sure how long she sat there, staring at the small constellation etched into the silver, before she finally spoke. If we've known each other before, if we've lived through this before, why don't we remember? Kian exhaled, leaning back in his chair. Maybe we do. Just not all at once. She looked up at him, searching his face. There was something familiar about the way his brow furrowed when he was deep in thought, the way he held his breath before answering, as if he were choosing his words carefully. So, you think we only get glimpses? She asked. Flashes and dreams, a feeling, a pull toward something or someone we don't understand. Kian nodded. What if every time we're born again, we get to carry just a fragment of the last time with us? Enough to remind us that we're still searching. Layla's heart clenched at his words. Still searching. That was exactly how it felt. She had spent her entire life feeling like something was missing, like she was waiting for someone to catch up with her. And now, sitting across from Kian, she wondered if he had always been the one she was waiting for. She let out a shaky breath. So, what happened to us before? If we keep finding each other, why do we keep losing each other? Kian's jaw tightened, as if he had asked himself the same question many times before. He ran a hand through his hair, sighing. Maybe that's the part we're supposed to figure out. Layla glanced at the pendant again, her mind racing. Have you ever had memories that don't feel like your own? He looked at her, intrigued. What do you mean? She hesitated, then spoke carefully. Sometimes I see things in my mind, moments that don't belong to this life. A flicker of candlelight in an old stone room, a storm on the horizon, a name I've never heard before but somehow feels important. Kian leaned forward. A name? Layla swallowed hard. Yes. Elias. The moment she said it, something shifted in Kian's expression. He stared at her, as if she had just spoken a secret neither of them were meant to know. Layla's pulse raced. You know it, don't you? Kian's hands were clenched into fists on the table. I don't know how, he admitted, his voice rough. But the moment you said it, I felt like I should. A chill ran down her spine. The name had been haunting her for years, whispering itself into her dreams, lingering on the edges of her consciousness. She had never spoken it aloud before, and yet Kian reacted as if it belonged to him just as much as it did to her. What if, she began, voice barely above a whisper. That's who we were before. Kian didn't answer right away. He simply stared at her, and in his eyes, she saw something she couldn't explain. Recognition, longing, maybe even grief. Then that means we lost each other once, he said finally. And we might have to find out why. A sharp pang of sorrow hit her chest, though she didn't understand why. How could she grieve for something she didn't even remember? Kian's voice softened. Layla, do you believe in soulmates? She let out a quiet laugh, but there was no humor in it. I didn't. Not until tonight. A long silence stretched between them. Outside, the rain had started, gentle drops tapping against the glass windows of the cafe. The dim light made shadows stretch across the wooden floor, as if even time itself was watching them, waiting for their next move. Layla closed her eyes for a brief moment, listening to the rhythm of the rain, trying to steady herself. When she opened them again, she met Kian's gaze with quiet determination. If we really have done this before, if we keep meeting lifetime after lifetime, then I don't want to waste this one. Kian inhaled sharply. Neither do I. The words settled between them like a promise, unspoken, yet deeply understood. This time, they wouldn't let go so easily. This time, they would find the answers. And maybe, just maybe, they would break the cycle. Or finally finish the story they had started lifetimes ago. The rain outside had softened to a quiet drizzle, misting the cafe windows and blurring the city lights beyond them. Inside, the space between Layla and Kian felt smaller, as though the universe itself had been pulling them toward this moment, urging them to uncover what had always been waiting. Layla traced the constellation on her pendant, her mind racing. If we've been here before, if we keep coming back to this moment in different lives, then what happened last time? Kian exhaled, rubbing his temple as if trying to recall something just beyond his reach. We need to figure that out. Every time we've been pulled apart, there's been a reason. And if we don't know what it is, we might be doomed to repeat it. Layla's heart clenched. The thought of losing him, of being ripped away once again, made something deep inside her ache in a way she couldn't explain. It was irrational. She had only met Kian hours ago, and yet she felt as if she had known him forever. Or perhaps she had. What if, she murmured, we're remembering now because this time is different. Kian studied her. How do you mean? She met his gaze, the intensity in her dark eyes matching his. What if every time before this, we weren't ready? What if something, fate, the universe, whatever force keeps bringing us back, was waiting for the right moment? Kian considered her words, his fingers tightening around his own pendant. Then maybe this is the lifetime where we finally get to finish our story. A flicker of hope sparked between them, but it was fragile, uncertain. Layla shifted in her seat, suddenly feeling restless. I think I need air, she whispered. Kian nodded, standing with her. Let's go. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the golden glow of streetlights. The air smelled of damp pavement and something fresh, something new. They walked in silence, their steps in sync, their breath steady. The weight of everything they had just uncovered lingered between them, unspoken but understood. Layla tilted her head toward the sky, searching for the constellation from their pendants, but the clouds concealed the stars. She let out a quiet sigh. It feels like we're chasing ghosts. Kian glanced at her. Maybe we are. Layla stopped walking, turning to face him. Then let's stop running in circles. Kian paused, waiting. I don't care who we were before, she said, her voice steady. I don't care how many times we've lost each other. All I care about is right now. Kian stepped closer, his presence warm even in the cool night air. Right now. She nodded. Right now we have a choice. Maybe fate brought us here. Maybe we're supposed to remember, so we don't make the same mistakes. But Kian, if we waste this life searching for the past, we'll miss the present. His breath hitched at her words. She was right. They could spend forever unraveling the mystery of who they had been, of why they kept losing each other. But in doing so, they risked losing the one thing that truly mattered, the time they had now. Kian lifted a hand, hesitating for only a second before gently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Then let's not waste it. Layla felt warmth bloom in her chest, something both familiar and new. Okay. A slow smile tugged at Kian's lips. Okay. They didn't need to say anything more. The past would always be there, whispering in the quiet spaces between their moments, but for the first time, they weren't afraid of what it held. Because this time, they weren't looking back. They were moving forward together. The night air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of rain and the distant hum of the city. Layla and Kian walked in silence, their hands still intertwined as if afraid to let go. The weight of their past lives lingered between them, no longer an unanswered mystery, but a quiet understanding that neither needed words to confirm. Kian exhaled slowly. It's strange, isn't it? How everything feels so familiar, yet we've only just met. Layla nodded, glancing up at the sky, where the clouds had begun to part. For the first time tonight, a few stars peeked through the darkness, faint but constant. She tightened her grip around his hand. Maybe it's not about how much time we've spent together. Maybe it's about how much we've always known. Kian looked at her then, really looked at her. And what do we know? She smiled softly. That we've been here before. That this isn't the first time. And maybe it won't be the last. Something in her voice sent a shiver through him. Not of fear, but of realization. They had spent so much time wondering about their pasts, about the lives they had lost, but now, standing in this moment, Kian understood something more important. We don't have to keep looking back, he murmured. Layla met his gaze, her dark eyes reflecting the city lights. No, we don't. A slow smile tugged at Kian's lips. Then what now? Layla took a deep breath, tilting her head slightly as she considered his question. Now, we make a choice. He arched an eyebrow. And what's that? Her fingers tightened around his. We choose not to waste this. Not to let the past dictate what we do with the time we have now. Kian's heart pounded at the certainty in her voice. She was right. They had spent lifetimes searching, lifetimes losing each other, but none of that mattered anymore. What mattered was this moment, this life, this chance to get it right. He turned fully to face her, lifting their intertwined hands between them. So, what if we stop searching for the past and just start living? Layla smiled. Then I think we finally get the ending we deserve. The night seemed to hum around them, as if the universe itself was acknowledging their choice. It no longer mattered how many times they had lost each other. What mattered was that, this time, they had chosen to stay. Kian leaned in slightly, his voice softer now. Then let's make sure we don't waste it. Layla nodded, a warmth spreading through her. We won't. With that, they turned together, walking forward into a future that, for the first time in countless lifetimes, they would get to shape themselves. The stars above shone a little brighter, as if they, too, knew that something had finally been set right. And for the first time, there was no more searching. Only finding. Only moving forward. Only love.